Thanks so much, and really delighted to be here and talking with you about how we at McKinsey see the quantum tech landscape, in particular the investor landscape and the startup scene in here. And I mean, to start here, perhaps a quick introduction also from my side. I already said, my name is Anna. I'm associate partner at McKinsey's office in Zurich. I have a background in industrial engineering, and since a couple of years, I'm almost exclusively focusing on quantum technologies, meaning from the providers in the value chain to kind of like users, meaning corporates using then industries, to investors and startups with technology strategy, but also corporate business building and use case, roadmaps and implementation. And I'm already like using this term quantum technologies quite broadly. I mean, we see here a lot of different halls and stands here. So for us, technologies meaning computing, sensing, and communications. With computing being very often the kind of like the primary focus when we talk about quantum. Often forgotten is then kind of like the sensing, which is sometimes referred to as a stepchild, or as we said yesterday, it could also be the grandfather of things. Communications is intertwined in all the areas and a bit kind of like for us less transparent. Given it's a kind of like a side product of many of those pieces. So what I'm referring to is mainly, and this is also why it's very publicly shareable, to our quantum monitor that we publish yearly, mainly kind of like, mostly in Q1, so once we have all the data, which gives a status update on where the industry is heading. So what is the investments that we see, increasing investments, what are the startups, the number of startups that we see, how does that differentiate between computing, sensing, communications, also a very much geopolitical perspective, and then also to a lesser extent in the monitor, but also very much in our work, what is the value at stake, in fact, that we see that a quantum can realize. And we are also looking, obviously, continuously on the research side and also added newly how the talent is developing. With that, I think I would like to start a bit with kind of like clear numbers. So what we've seen, and we have the data since the early 2000s, that the investments in the quantum space are increasing, but mainly kind of like almost 70% of the investments we see being focused or being made in the past 2 years. So this is a bit the hype that after 2019, I want to say, after kind of like first announcement have been made, is really accelerating with kind of like then 2022, which is kind of like the data that we have last, being only like a minor increase. So we clearly see and can corroborate that there is a bit of a cool down in the ecosystem when it comes to investments and when it comes to enthusiasm. So we clearly see that the landscape requires some, I want to say, especially from the hardware side, some clear achievements that the field is moving forward, especially with the focus being tremendously on computing. Although we also see that there are some, obviously, in other fields. And when we think about, I mean, we talked about the different fields, computing, sensing, and communications. Yes, as said, and as you can see here on the slide, it's mainly like the focus on the computing side, and we also believe this is continuously being the case, in fact, for the current year. Then when we contrast that with the investments that have have been continuously increasing with kind of like the startups, establishing startups. So we can clearly see that here the pace of the startup formation has not kept pace with the investments in the space, which is one of the messages. But the second is also that we see that when we look into where is the funding flowing, it's mainly established ideas, so Series B, also Series A, and so on. To a lesser extent, fully new startups. So there's a bit this risk aversion, in fact, in the ecosystem. In the ecosystem, and also here. Clear focus when it comes to the startups, similar to the investments, focus on computing. And then what are the kind of like the big deals here? We said, okay, clearly there are this over 3.3 billion of investments. Where are they flowing? And what we see when we analyze the data is that the ticket sizes become increasingly large. So since kind of like the past 20 years, 40% of the top 10 deals have been made, in fact, in the last year. So clearly Sandbox being a leader here as a spin-off from Alphabet, focusing on quantum and AI, but then also Rigetti in the computing space, being focused on superconducting, D-Wave with the annealers, but then also now kind of like the gate-based, and then Origin, which is something new, mainly from the China side. So the deals increasing or kind of like mainly focused on US or North America, to some extent the UK. We see that throughout all the deals, that there is a strong emphasis on the North American market, and we also see shortly that kind of like it's only a sixth of the investments which are flowing into Europe versus, for example, the US. And in fact, we also see that trend increasing for the current year, with a couple of funding rounds being made this year or still to be closed. So what I was already alluding to, when we kind of like switch a bit from the overall investments or to the overall corporate perspective to the macro perspective, where does the funding come from and how is it split? So we see massive investments in the US. Kind of like Europe is really lagging here behind. Although there are some announcements more and more for funding, here clearly the US is leading, and we also see in China with kind of like the 5-year plan, with the 14th 5-year plan, that there is more and more emphasis on further investments here, and clearly like the private investments in the US and leading here. So as said, when we look or when we double down on Europe, where's kind of like most funding coming from? Yes, we're here in Germany, so like 50% in fact of the investments being made from Germany in all sorts of projects or funding vehicles. Then to some extent also France, we see also a quite vibrant ecosystem, startup ecosystem there, and to some extent also obviously then coming from Delft and so on, from the Netherlands. And as said, yes, China leading the pack with continuous investments here over the past over 20 years. And with further investments announced in 2021 it was. So when we look at now the value chain, where does that investment flow to? So we clearly said earlier, major part in hardware. So we usually make up the stack from the components to the hardware to the software and then the services. And we contrasted here in this short analysis where is the funding flowing versus where are the startups, and then also how we see the value shifting. So we said earlier, almost 80% of the funding is flowing into hardware, and we see that more and more the case because the hardware is as the bottleneck to unfold further software and services. We see this a bit, the software companies almost in a wait-and-see mode to make next pushes, in fact, in the ecosystem. Then here the players constitute though only kind of like roughly 20%. Why is that a fact? Obviously they need a lot of capital to accelerate on their roadmaps, extremely capital intensive versus what we see then, for example, on the software side. But what we also see on the software side as kind of like recent trends this year, and which is probably not reflected yet here, which will be then published in our next monitor, is that we also see quite some of the software startup branching out. So not only focusing anymore on quantum, but opening also to AI with kind of like one of the most recent announcement or news being Zapata Computing that have purely focused on quantum software, now be shifting in fact also to AI. And we see that like across the board with a couple of the software startups in fact. Interesting also, I think in the component space, very, very important, but somehow overseen area. So really limited funding is flowing there. It's mainly driven by already established corporates, somehow also startups coming into the system here and into the ecosystem, but I think there is definitely space for more, and there's also need for more. And when we see how does the value in fact over the time will evolve, so we see that for the first years as a prediction, the value will sit mainly in the component, in the hardware space, and as the technology matures, we see, as with many other technologies, that the value will shift more and more towards software and then also services. Yeah, I think this hopefully kind of like clarifies it a little bit when we look at the share of investments. Then again, to which extent there is this focus in fact on the hardware side. And this is probably like a sneak peek. So we talked quite a bit about the investments, the startups, but where is now the value? What are the industries that we believe are mainly benefiting from quantum? And we see kind of like 4 primary industries being kind of like here the front runners or having benefits very early on. Given the use cases, the nature of the use cases that we see in the landscape. And this is mainly things that evolve around simulation and to a certain extent optimization as well, because here it's where we analyze that the quantum speedups, especially when it comes to computing, will be extremely meaningful. And simulation, that means industries that you can see also here, and that will benefit are chemicals, everything that revolves around chemical simulation, simulations that you also have in the life science, in the pharmaceutical space, especially when you think about drug discovery here. Then obviously also in automotive, material design, and to a certain extent, but much more on the optimization side in the financial industry. So use cases that you can think of is designing new catalysts in the automotive space, also in the realm of sustainability, lightweight production, for example, green ammonia, things like that. In the life science space, I already mentioned drug discovery, which is a clear focus. So hit identification, leads, where you can simulate, where you can simulate kind of like new catalysts or ATME properties, for example. I think automotive is a bit of an overarching theme when it comes to the chemicals. Clearly important here. Also sensing, very interesting. For example, in the with regards to navigation, and then financial services, which is mainly around risk assessments, portfolio optimization. And potentially I'm running out of time, but I really want to close here. When we look now, what are barriers, in fact, beyond kind of like capital, beyond achievements or scientific progress, we clearly see that talent is more and more of a topic that comes especially for corporates to mind when they start setting up their teams, exploring the quantum space. So where does the talent come from? And one in two kind of like positions still remains unfilled, although we see that especially in the last year, I don't want to even say 1.5 years, especially universities have taken up the request and also the need for more education here, also for more kind of like, don't want to say practical, but targeted educations with master programs, for example. This is a clear kind of like push into the right direction to have more talent in the space. Yeah. And I think with that, I want to close. You can kind of like also scan the QR code, so you have kind of like these slides and many more directly at hand. If any further questions remain, definitely feel free to reach out, and happy to get into contact. Thanks so much for your time, and hope you can enjoy the remainder of the day.